What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel. Hi, you're listening to episode 4 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Tilly.
And I'm Ash.
And today we're going to be talking all about werewolves.
Oh, but I don't know anything about werewolves.
Oh.
That's not my specialty at all.
Okay.
Maybe we can find somebody to help us.
Okay. Do you know anyone?
I think I do. David Ian Howe, are you there?
I am here, yes.
Oh! Well, isn't that convenient?
I know everyone.
Welcome, David Ian Howe, who I believe happens to be a specialist in the archaeology of dogs. So indeed, perfect for this particular subject.
Not exactly werewolves, but yeah, dog bones for sure.
I mean, close enough.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us. So obviously we're heading into a fantastical realm, fantasy universe. Do you enjoy reading fantasy?
I haven't read a book since Chronicles of Narnia, but I do enjoy fantasy.
Well, that was fantasy, so...
Yeah, that's true. No, but I love fantasy, like... I mean, obviously, Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite things. I got a tattoo of it, and just D&D, like I play, do all that.
Yes.
Which tattoo do you have?
I got Boromir recently. Yeah. Underrated character.
Definitely.
Very much so. Very much so.
And D&D, you said? Do you play, like, in person with a group?
Over, like, during COVID, I played a bunch, like, over Discord, and then, like, when my friends get together once a year, we do, like, a big, long, like, day-long session.
Oh, that's so fun.
I'm really bad at it because I can't count dice, but...
I'm also terrible at counting dice.
My friends just have to call it out for me because it takes too long for me to figure it out.
But hang on, what? Are the numbers on the dice?
Yes, but it's like adding. I can't add. I'm really bad at it.
It's adding and like dyslexia for me because I'm like, is that 5 or is that 3? Like, I don't.
Yeah.
Sure, you can use that to your advantage, especially if it's online. You can be like, yes, it's totally an 18. But have you done D&D yet?
Yes, I've done a few campaigns. I'm not great at it. I'm not a great actor, but I do love it. And I'm obsessed right now with Baldur's Gate 3. So, which is the game.
Okay, I was about to say, you're speaking to someone who is completely...
Which is on the computer. So I'm obsessed with that and Asterion and all that. So, I'm a big D&D fan.
Excellent. I do have to like D&D. I mean, D&D was also a bit of the sort of inspiration for this podcast, so I suppose it was inevitable that we would both be interested in it. So you mentioned Lord of the Rings, so that is the sort of the favourite, the top fantasy book or series, or are there any others?
For me, Lord of the Rings. I don't know if Dune is considered fantasy more than sci-fi, but I would say that too. Game of Thrones, I read all of that. Well, all of that's out. And I'm trying to think of other fantasies. Like, I just really like whenever stuff like that comes on and it's well made. I like it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's, Lord of the Rings for me. We spoke about this in our first episode. Lord of the Rings is definitely, I think,
I mean, Tolkien wrote the book, and after everything like that, it's kind of difficult to be unique and different. I think he sort of came up with all the different kind of characters and stats and like everything, really. The lore is fantastic. So everything else after that is kind of a little bit of an imitation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like even in Star Wars, it's pretty influenced by Lord of the Rings. I mean, mostly Dune, but and samurai culture, but
true.
Yeah.
I think it's quite like medieval fantasy Star Wars, actually. You know, it's hero, and then they have troubles, but they always prevail. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Religion, big part.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have watched Ahsoka or like any of the new Star Wars stuff.
I haven't yet. I'm so desperate to.
I haven't even watched the new season of The
Filoni.
Witcher. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. The Witcher's fantasy. Dave Filoni, the guy who makes all the new Star Wars stuff, like he's our Lord and Savior Filoni is what people call him. But he loves Kurosawa, and like the original like Darth Vader Obi-Wan fight was like supposed to be like a samurai like duel. But of course, as technology got better, they made the fight scenes more crazy. But he brings it back to like a Kill Bill Kurosawa looking like artistic fight and stuff. Yeah, it's really good. Mandalorian as well.
Yeah, I love
Also haven't seen that
Mandalorian.
yet. I need to catch up on a bunch of watching. I've just been way behind for a
I
lot
have
of
like
reasons.
3 pictures of Grogu in front of me right now, so I love him.
True, I forgot. Don't you have a hoodie with him?
I have a hoodie. I have 2 pairs of slippers. I have 3 stuffed animals of him. Well, stuffed Yodas. Yeah, I have a lot. I really love him.
Well, okay, so it seems that indeed we are fantasy aficionados, but bringing it back to the sort of, is it classical fantasy werewolf? I don't know, but anyway, the fantasy of non-star related subjects. Yeah. I want you, Ash and David, to imagine yourself in the middle of a pine forest. It's very dark. It's very cold. Even though it's the end of summer, there's already snow in the topmost branches, and whenever the wind picks up, a dollop drops down onto the moss-covered ground, occasionally also onto your head. You've been tasked with excavating a grave site, which was noted down in the scrolls before, but the exact nature of the grave seems to have been glossed over a little bit. It's a very vague site report. And as you dig, you start to notice a kind of pattern, but it's a bit confusing. So the burials all include grave goods. These include carved bone pendants, stone beads, some scraps of leather clothing even, because the preservation in the colder ground is really excellent. Weirdly, there doesn't seem to be anything like cups or beakers, which you might expect in this particular time period, and also no kind of hunting weapons. But the strangest part is the identification of the bones, because they are a mixture of human bones and what appear to be large dog bones. So some burials include just human, some just dog, but some have like a mixture of the two. You are tasked with finding out what could this mean. Is it a ritual site dedicated to dogs or pets or something similar? Has there been any post-depositional disturbance that has caused the mixing of species? One possible interpretation that has been suggested tentatively by one of the students on the dig is that maybe it could be an old werewolf burial site. So that is the situation.
It's going to be hard to get peer review on this one, but we'll give it a shot.
I mean, I guess it depends who's doing the reviewing. If it's, the wizard in the local university,
Yeah, that's true.
we might have a shot. But so I was wondering if either of you knew anything about the origins of werewolves and the werewolf myth.
Ash, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I know you get bit by a werewolf, and on the first full moon you turn, and then if you sample flesh, you turn into a werewolf for the rest of your life. I think.
I mean, that is correct. That is the general. I mean, that's a sort of the established sort of fantasy fictional depiction of a werewolf, I guess, in this time. Do we know anything about the history of werewolves? Maybe our dog expert can come in, or maybe also not so much.
So the oldest depiction of werewolves, I think, might be in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which blew my mind. And there are a lot of... There's lycanthropy is the word, which is I think it's just the fusing of humans and wolves, as a scimitar, or not scimitar, centaur, and
we're back to summarizing it.
What were those things called that are goat man people? The guy from
I know what you mean,
Hercules.
but I don't know.
Satyr, yeah, that's right. So werewolves kind of fall into those categories, cryptid, fantastical things. But yeah, and it really picked up in Europe, especially in the Middle Ages with Christianity as well, because they could attribute it to something demonic, and they had a common theme that way. But every regional culture, even in East Asia, have werewolf folklore, and even in indigenous America as well, which is pretty interesting, though it super varies here.
And it's not always about wolves though, right? I know that sometimes in Africa it's hyenas or something, and it's a lot of polar bears in the Arctic North America.
I didn't know about polar bears, but definitely hyenas in Africa are always associated with witchcraft, which is interesting. Yeah, because they're cunning and creepy. But
yeah. So, and Epic of Gilgamesh, what is the date of that? I feel I should know this, but do you happen to know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I will say it's BC.
That sounds right. I am going to quickly look this up. Then we can pretend that we knew all about it. 2100 to 1200 BC.
Okay. So a while back.
Yes, quite a while back. And that actually goes even further back then, because what I had sort of vaguely looked up was about ancient Greece, so the sort of 2nd century BC. And there's a myth regarding King Lycaon of Arcadia, who somehow managed to get on the wrong side of Zeus, which, depending on who tells the story, I mean, there's lots of ways to get on the wrong side of Zeus, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of variations of how this happened. But basically, in most of the stories, he's turned into a wolf in some shape.
Is that where lycanthropy comes from then?
Probably, I assume.
Yeah, I think, there's lupus as wolf in Latin, but in Greek it might be, I know the African wild dogs, the genus is Lycaon, so it comes from that, but it might be some language over there.
Yeah, and you mentioned it in lots of parts of the world, so it's also mentioned in, for example, the Prose Edda and other Icelandic sagas, so that's around the 13th century AD. They talk about shape-shifting from men to wolves, although it's, depending on the translation, which I found quite interesting, it's unsure whether they're taking on like the skins of wolves in terms of like wearing the pelts on the hides of wolves, or actually like going into the skin of a wolf, so like becoming a wolf, which, I guess depending on how you interpret these sort of things. But so, have either of you read many books or watched many series that focus on werewolves as a concept?
I can think of two. Do you guys have any?
Yeah, I can think of a few as well. One that immediately popped into my head was Twilight.
Of course.
Yeah, right. Twilight.
Well, that's like, it's the biggest one in the early 2000s and 2010s.
Yeah.
How you doing, Luca? Everyone knows it, unfortunately. But
Harry Potter is the one that comes to mind for me. Yeah.
That's a big one.
With Remus Lupin, which should have given it away, but I was too young.
Right? It's one of those things that when you look back at it as an adult, you're like, oh. Gotta give us something.
Vader's father should have figured that out too.
Right? But were there any other? So we have Twilight, we have Harry Potter. You both mentioned you had a few. Any others, Ash?
Supernatural, the TV show.
Oh,
right.
Yeah, because I watched that when I was quite young, and then it talks about silver bullets, how to kill certain werewolves, blood moons.
Oh, right.
Everything. Yeah.
Van Helsing for sure, and then Teen Wolf over here.
Oh, Teen Wolf, yes, true. Yeah, that's also a good one.
Van Helsing was an awesome movie.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah,
I really want to watch that again now. Now that you've mentioned it.
It's Hugh Jackman, right?
Yes. Just classic steampunk, like proper old style.
Yeah.
Now you're making me want to watch it.
The music lives rent free in my head.
Oh, I can't even.
I'll have to listen to it again.
I was about to say, I have to listen to it again.
It does. It's so good.
All the listeners will be stopping their podcast.
You need to get on a horse and go slay something.
That does sound good.
Very good.
Well, of course, my favourite depiction of a werewolf has to be, guess the author, Ash.
Oh God, no, don't put that pressure on me.
Of course, there's werewolves in Terry Pratchett.
Oh my gosh, of course. How did I forget?
In case you don't realise, David, I'm slightly obsessed with Terry Pratchett as a fantasy author, and I managed to wrangle him into every single episode because he has a lot of books and there's a lot of different fantasy concepts in them. So I will definitely be wrangling that into this episode as well. But indeed, point is, it's quite a sort of a big part of fantasy fiction. But weirdly, it doesn't seem to be. I mean, we've mentioned a couple of books, but it doesn't actually seem to be that big a concept. Like, considering the rich history and considering that it's present all over the world in terms of modern fantasy fiction, it's not as popular. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I don't know. I think there's quite a lot of like those kind of shifter books that are quite popular in romance and fantasy.
Animorphs.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Animorphs. Yeah. Oh, they were so good. Yeah.
I would say, I know in medieval Europe, for sure, like werewolves is like, or in Gilgamesh, he was worried that Ishtar, I think is the goddess, like was tempting him, and he was like, well, she'll turn me into a wolf if I give into this. So that was like the thing. And then, but in medieval Europe, men were persecuted as werewolves, just like women were as witches. But I imagine women were more persecuted than the men, unfortunately, in medieval Europe. But it kind of went that way. And I think because of that, it's why it's not like a super prominent thing. But I would also argue like it still persisted. We're still talking about werewolves, and it's like a common fantasy trope. So I guess it was in a recent Black Mirror episode, actually, which I guess kind of gives away the ending, but I mentioned to my husband that we were doing the werewolves episode. He was like, oh, there was a Black Mirror episode about that. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it really threw me off guard because they're usually like pretty realistic, and I was like, what?
Oh, yeah. And actually, now you mentioned the whole witches for women, werewolves for men thing. I can definitely remember at some point in high school, we read some version of Little Red Riding Hood, but like an adult version. And the whole thing was like the wolf was supposed to be a metaphor for, men preying on young girls and all this kind of stuff. And then the werewolf myth apparently came from that and all as well, which, I mean, there seems to be so many different ways that the werewolf myth came about. So I never know which one to trust.
Gotcha. No, it makes total sense. I never thought about that because in indigenous America, men who prey on young women are like called wolves. And there's like Navajo beliefs in it too. Like, I guess Navajo are the most populated ones here. Like there's interpretations, like did it come from Norse mythology when the Norse got here? And it's like, I don't think that happened, but like they probably had their own. And then there's other, you can't technically say the words because that brings them to you, and I don't want to offend anybody, but there's ones in the eastern woodlands that climb through trees, and there's others that can't remember the other one. Out here, there's like shape-shifting and stuff, and it's definitely still a thing that on the reservations it's still like talked about.
Yeah. Which I think actually we'll probably talk about that later, either in this episode or next episode, because I have more notes on that, but I don't think we can get into it right now.
Sure.
It would be it's great to have you here, David. It seems that you're very knowledgeable indeed on the topic. I see an inn coming up, so maybe we can make ourselves a bit more comfortable there. We'll get settled, and we will be right back, everyone. Oh, what a lovely inn. So I feel like I need to work on my acting skills. So David, thanks for joining us again. Now that we know a little bit more about werewolves. So what I found really interesting, starting to think about how you would actually tackle this problem, there's so many different things that I never really thought about, but then when you think about it from an archaeological perspective, like for example, werewolf bones. So when they change, everything internally must change. I don't know if either of you have ever thought about this, but this was something that I was like, oh.
I guess, yeah, like as someone who does bones a lot, like it would depend on the transitional stage where you're at. Like, are you half wolf at the moment? Or are you full blown wolf? Do you have like longer, front limbs and the back limbs? I think that's usually the case. Like they're always hunched over. Mm-hmm. You would have trouble determining for sure, like the age and sex of the skeleton. Yeah. Or like, is this a human with cancer, or is this like a wolf that ate? I don't know. The bones would be all over the place. Yeah.
And especially because I was also thinking, indeed, if they're transitioning, like, does that mean that there's some bones that are half human, half dog? Like, would that work?
I don't know. I guess maybe it's like a cartilage situation. Everything just turns to
mush.
Yeah. And, I don't know. That's a good question. Because, like, to dig them up, you'd certainly be confused.
And I mean, in your career as an archaeologist, have either of you ever encountered anything similar to this? I don't know, animal burials which were mixed with other things or seemed a bit odd?
I found in an Oregon Trail homestead site in Wyoming a giant like garbage pit that had tea kettles, bunch of shotgun shells, some like cast iron, and then a really bizarre, for some reason, porcupine skull that was preserved perfectly that had like stuff tied to it. It was really weird.
I mean, that sounds like ritual to me.
Definitely. It was probably just some kid and the parents were like, throw it out.
So I guess actually your experience of digging has mainly been in areas where bones haven't actually preserved as well, or do you also find bones?
No, I found animal bones. I mean, I've dug big sheep pits full of rubbish. I've also I found a horse once. But cool. It was just a post-medieval horse, like someone's horse that we're using on the farm. Must have died. And yeah, it was just dug up and, well, they dug a grave and put it in there, and it was just a little pony thing. And there was a few cows. I've seen a few cows. One of my favorite stories was that, I've not found this. This is just a story. On Uist, there's a guy who was digging a hole to put his car in, and farming.
Wait.
A car.
Back up. You said that as if that's like, oh yeah, you know, you dig a hole to what?
He got rid of it somehow. It's difficult on an island, so he dug up his croft and he put his car in this hole, and a crofter came along and had a dead sheep and was going to bury it, and was like, can I just put my sheep in this hole? And the guy was like, yeah, no problem. And so what he did instead is that he got the sheep, and this is a bit, I don't know, some people might not like this. He put the sheep and he put it in the driver's seat, and he put his little hoofs on the pedals on like the gas and the clutch, and then like positioned it as if it was going to be driving the car. So he thought that in the future archaeologists would dig it up and be extremely confused, and I hope I'm alive for that, because that would be amazing.
Was that in the UK?
Yeah, it was in the island, South Uist, which is just off
Scottish Island.
Okay. Interesting.
I mean, they'd think like, wow, the sheep must have been so developed. Like, oh, that would just perpetuate all the stereotypes of like human and sheep interactions on these island communities.
Hey, no. That's not family you're talking about. No, but
that's what I mean. It's ruining the reputation.
It's a good story, though. I think I would absolutely love for someone to find that, because then you'd have to call the police, because you wouldn't be sure if it was a sheep or a human, and then the police would turn up.
That would be similar to this situation, because you'd be like, well, it's a skeleton, it's driving, but that doesn't look like a human skull.
Yeah. Or like a Piltdown Man situation.
Yeah. So if you had a werewolf burial, you'd still have to call the police, because, I mean, if it's in the UK, I don't know elsewhere, but in the UK, you always have to call the police if you think it is anything remotely human. I know people that have called it on a pig burials and stuff, because sometimes they're so similar. Right? Yeah. And the police turn up and go, oh, yeah, that's definitely old. And that's it. Yeah.
And how does that work in America then, David?
Could you find something bizarre like that?
Or like human... or bizarre, yeah, but sort of human burials.
If it's a human burial and it is like historic or post-contact, then like you can do whatever. If it is pre-contact, then you have to consult with the tribes and see what they want to do with it, or like reroute the project kind of thing.
Okay.
But if they have something crazy going on with it, I don't know who you would call. The coroner, and then
we'd come investigate.
Yes, that's why Well, and so, because another question that I had when I was thinking, so in the scenario that we have here, it's a burial site, but would werewolves have actually had burial site? And you might know a bit more about this, David. Are wolves, I mean, in my mind, they're nomadic, but are they? Would they, if they were werewolves, would they have a settlement? Would they be just kind of roaming around? What would you say?
Wolves don't technically bury each other. Like they'll throw dirt over each other sometimes, like just so it doesn't smell, or to like cache it sometimes. Like if they're really hungry, they'll eat. Or they'll cache other animals too. Like I saw someone's dog like throwing dirt over a coyote, and she sent me the video, and she's like, "It's so beautiful. He's burying the coyote." I was like, "No, he's going to eat it later."
I mean, you're technically not incorrect.
He's just marinating it. But
ruined the idea.
Yeah, she made a whole post about it. I had like 25,000 likes, and I was like, nah. I felt bad, but just wanted to be scientific. But it was cool. Yeah, werewolves. It would depend, on how much more primate they are than lupine. So it would be do they have social gatherings? Do they have customs? Like, I don't know. I've never seen like a triumvirate of werewolves like talking politics together to figure that out.
Well, you'd think they'd run in a pack of some kind. They would emulate wolves in some way, right? With a bit of humanoid kind of social and society and stuff.
I didn't read Twilight. I read the first one, but I
I'm not basing my whole thing off Twilight.
Are there like groups of werewolves in that? Because I've never seen.
Yeah, there's the Kulip tribe. I think it's. I'm forgive me for the pronunciation. I'm not too sure. It's based on different indigenous tribes. I know that was a big issue.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think there is, but I think it's kind of othering, and it's not helpful. But in other kind of books and fantasy scenarios, you find there is the kind of typical lone wolf, but then you also have ones that have a pack, and they unfortunately emulate that kind of alpha kind of stereotype, but that's not true, and that's not how wolves interact or in the world. There's a fantasy series called Deborah Harkness does it, and she a discovery of witches, and actually weirdly enough the vampires
emulate wolves as well.
Yeah, the vampires emulate wolves instead of werewolves. And they kind of move around in a similar way, in similar fashion. And actually part of the storyline is to find out about wolves and the blood of wolves and how people move around and why they're not why these creatures like demons and vampires and witches aren't reproducing anymore. So that's actually quite a good one, even though it's vampires.
Okay. I didn't know that. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with wolves, or werewolves, I should say, and whether they're in their group pack dynamics. But yeah, I guess if we were to like play along, like I would say there are probably some pack dynamics if they're multiple. But burials, not sure, unless it was somebody. Well, I guess here's an option, like to go with ritual. If it was a loved one that turned into a werewolf and you had to shoot it or something, or like the townsfolk went with pitchforks to get it, you might have to bury it ceremonially because you're like a human.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and people do bury vampires in strange ways, like with stone in them.
All the vampire burials,
so, yeah. You probably do the same thing, yeah.
Well, and that would make sense then, because this isn't then necessarily the burial site for a werewolf pack. It's maybe the burial site related to a village that has been hounded by a werewolf, so therefore this is the place where all of the victims are being buried because, yeah, like you say, they've maybe had to be shot or something. So that could be an interesting.
Yeah,
then we'd have to look at if it's a deviant burial. So
and what is a deviant? What is a deviant burial?
A deviant burial is when you find a burial that is completely out of the context of the society. So, for example, the vampire burials that you find a lot of the time, you find them in Scotland sometimes, or witches' burials. They often have a stone either in their mouth or on their chest. And the scene is deviant because, they also alter.
They're really cool.
If it's a Christian society, so it's usually buried east to west. They often alter the chain, like the alignment of the burial as well, or they'll put it outside of consecrated grounds. So you can find sometimes, unfortunately, like women that die in childbirth, they might be buried somewhere else, and they're kind of seen as, in the early medieval period and Anglo-Saxon period, they are. They're slightly treated differently, and we don't know why.
That's a bummer.
I know, right?
Right? As if you haven't had enough trauma.
Yeah, it's like as if, I don't know, it's something to do with their life ways and how they view perhaps women giving birth or how they view the child as well.
That's just so interesting because in Mexican mythology, you go to like essentially their Valhalla if you die in childbirth. Like it's
really?
Yeah. That's cool.
Oh, I love that.
You live with Huitzilopochtli, who is the sun god, and you live with like the men who died as warriors and the women who died in childbirth, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
I mean, as someone who has experienced it twice now, I can say it's comparable in some ways.
Yeah, props to you. I could never do it.
I mean, luckily, you don't have to.
I don't think I could either.
True.
It's not, I mean, yeah. Well, anyway, let's not get into that. Let's not get into that now. But
this is about werewolves.
Werewolves, indeed. And so the other question was, indeed, would they be... So one interpretation could be that these are the victims then of like werewolf attacks. But what if it was indeed like a werewolf pack's burial ground or whatever? Are wolves in general, do they move around a lot? Do they have kind of a settled, I don't know what it would be called, den or something that they kind of mainly stay in?
Yeah, they kind of like human foragers. They just go around. I know the ones that are tagged in Yellowstone, like they can walk forever. Like, I mean, Yellowstone's pretty enclosed. It's Jurassic Park, but like you can track where they go. But then when packs like leave Yellowstone and go like kind of rogue, they can end up in Idaho or Montana or Wyoming or southern Wyoming and Colorado. So, which is why the wolf thing is a big political issue here.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, they can wander pretty far, but they do have their dens, and then they switch it seasonally for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah. And because you mentioned, indeed, that's quite similar to how kind of early hunter-gatherers, it's assumed that they would have lived, right? Like they wouldn't necessarily have had settlements that they've had.
And that's like a big thing of my I guess, proselytizing of ethnocynology. Is just like humans and wolves are so similar. And they would have I guess humans going into Eurasia would have noticed like wolf behavior and kind of felt like kinship with it because it's pretty similar. Yeah. Which I guess is why it's kind of like werewolves I see kind of like Bigfoot. So not to distract, but you have Bigfoot myths or like the Yeti or the Sasquatch, which are, we fear we don't want to be back to our hairy primal state, but like the greys, like the aliens that are tiny and skinless or hairless and big eyes, that's like how a chimp looks at us. So we kind of are scared of what we're not in the future.
Yeah.
So like,
I thought of it like that.
We're in, but yeah, it's like, I just find that really fascinating because they're always the same kind of tall or tiny, hairless, not skinless, things. Naked is what I'm going for. Huge brained things. But for werewolves too, it's like we, in Western canon and like mythology and just culture, and it's definitely Christianity perpetuated this, but wolves are like a very persecuted animal. Whereas in like Mongolian mythology, like humans and dogs share kinship with wolves. Like we come from the same origin. In indigenous American mythology, like wolves are super revered, so are dogs. So the persecution of wolves in Europe, because it just got so populated and wolves were everywhere, would kind of turn into like why werewolves are a thing, if that makes sense. Like you're scared of becoming something that's persecuted. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, now, okay, this is an interesting discussion, but I see that there's a bunch of orcs have just entered the inn that we're in, and they don't look very happy, so maybe it might have something to do with that group of elves in the corner over there, so maybe we should quickly take cover momentarily and regroup once things have died down a bit, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think that's a good idea. I don't want to be here right now.
Okay, so sorry everyone, we need to cut short this episode of And My Trowel, but don't worry, we'll be continuing next episode with part 2. In the meantime, as always, if there's any suggestions that people have for an episode that they may have gotten from a fantasy book, or maybe there's an archaeological concept that you don't understand that maybe we can explain through fantasy, or something in a book that you might want to find out as an archaeologist, just get in contact with us via email or social media. All of our contact info can be found in the show notes.
Oh my god, watch out for that axe!
Oh, damn.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.